Hey everybody, welcome back to Go Read Some Comics with me, Professor Jenna. I'm back with another exclusive interview on the channel, this time with Jason Aaron, who is currently the writer of DC's Absolute Superman. Jason has had a very prolific career in the comic industry, from Star Wars to creating Mighty Thor and Gore the God Butcher, and writing countless epic titles over at Marvel. He has recently jumped over to the DC side and is killing it on Absolute Superman. I found this book to be so profound and so interesting. I talked to Jason about the book's most recent issue, Absolute Superman number 4, which is available wherever comics are sold today, so definitely go pick up a copy. We talked about reinventing Superman and Lois Lane and Peacemaker and a couple other surprises, and it is just a very fun interview. I hope you enjoy it. I'm so glad to get to speak with you, especially for a book that has been this amazing just across the board. What have been the most surprising or gratifying responses that you've gotten from readers so far?
I mean, that's a good question. I think it's all been gratifying. I kind of never go into any project with expectations of what people are going to think about it or how it's going to do or any of that sort of stuff. That's all beyond my control. I just know, I know whether we have a good story or not, right? Like where there's something I'm excited about or I feel like there's meat to it. And I definitely felt very, very excited about everything really we're doing in the absolute universe. But my part of it, I felt really good about Superman. So it's been great to see those books make such a huge impact and see people, seeming to really love all of them in that first wave. And people seem excited about the second wave that's about to come too. So I mean, it's all been cool for me and I'm pretty new to DC, and I haven't written much stuff there just yet. Kind of only just did a couple issues of Action Comics last year, so I'm very new to Superman. But all the Superman fans that I've seen and had anything to do with have been super cool and welcoming and seem to be digging the book so far, which is great. And, it started with Mark Waid. Mark Waid was like my canary in the coal mine of like I'd send everything to him, make sure I wasn't going way off the path I should follow.
You mentioned kind of having meat on the bone for the story. One element of the book that I've been dying to kind of talk to you and ask you about is the through line of AI and writing and creativity, because I think you've done such a brilliant job of weaving that into both the flashbacks and the main story. How important has it been for you to kind of tackle that in this book? Because every single issue, it just feels more and more timely.
That was really not a thing I kind of had planned out ahead of time, really. I mean, I think when you start dealing with Brainiac, that can sometimes be a part of it. I didn't want that version of Brainiac to be kind of what we normally associate with the character. So I was trying to go in a different direction with him. And you'll see, we've only scratched the surface of that. You'll kind of see more of that as we go. So those pieces kind of all clicked together just in that issue. Was issue 3, I guess, with the Krypton issue, when we kind of realized that Kal-El loved to write as a kid, right? Like I wanted that to be a part of who he was on Krypton. I wanted to take those things we kind of normally associate with the Clark Kent part of the persona and make those genuine pieces of who he is, right? That he can be this guy who is shy and awkward and a bit clumsy and who would much rather be sitting in a room by himself writing something than out among people. But then when he needs to be Superman, that switch clicks and he is Superman, in every sense of the word. He is very genuinely both of those people without either one being pretend or an affectation. That part of it was really important to me. So it was important that he doesn't start writing just because he needs a cover, to be Clark Kent as a reporter. Like that's a genuine important piece of who he is that goes back to Krypton.
I love that so much. And I've loved also seeing kind of a similar sort of arc with Lois, especially in this issue. I know you've spoken in previous issues about your touchstones personally for Superman from like the comics and other media, but what was your North Star in your approach to Lois?
To me, the main thing with anybody we sort of meet in this book, in this absolute universe, is nobody is where they're kind of quote unquote supposed to be. This whole universe is flawed and corrupted and sort of a dark mirror image of the one we're used to. So none of the characters we meet should be living the sort of lives we're used to seeing them live. They shouldn't be in happy places, really. Like everybody's in sort of a darker place. So this is a darker version of Lois than we've seen. And you get at least maybe some of the answers as to why she went down this path in this issue. And we bring her dad in and see what's happened to him. And in her mind, she still feels like she's fighting the good fight until she meets Superman. And that's sort of the first time she gets these whispers that maybe you're on the wrong side. So that's where she's at. She's just been haunted by her previous encounter with Superman and chasing him all over the world. She's a bit more rough and tumble, than the Lois we've seen. She's not afraid to like jump in and get her hands dirty. And we see her kind of taking taking care of a peacemaker in the opening scene. This is a darker world. This is a darker, angrier version of Lois, kind of like most of the characters that we'll see in the Absolute Universe, just in different ways.
So you mentioned her dad. I really love their dynamic in this issue and kind of what we learn about him just as his own individual. How did you land on the specifics of what we learn about him and his accident in this issue?
Liked the idea of her still having a father who was, it's unclear if he's part of the military or just part of Lazarus Corp, or they're kind of the same thing in some sense of the word. So I like that sort of, some of it's kind of Lois's position and things, and the other character who we meet in this issue, who's part of the Omega Men, like just sort of setting them up on very opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Kind of both of them in their minds fighting the good fight, like doing what's right and seeing the other one as an enemy. And then Superman's kind of plopped in the middle of that. So some of it was just engineering who should this version of Lois be in this universe, and just so we can have those kind of opposing forces on opposite sides of Superman. And I did just want her to be someone who would, kick a little ass too.
You mentioned the Omega Men, so I'll just jump ahead to that question. They've certainly been reinvented a lot in the comics before, but your approach kind of takes it to a whole other level, like you mentioned, of everything just being darker. What was kind of your inspiration for this new take on them, and especially having Jimmy be a part of their ranks?
I love the Omega Men. I love that. I mean, I was a big New Teen Titans guy growing up, so that space arc, where they teamed up with the Titans was huge for me, and I loved that original Omega Men series. I read every issue of that. I love those characters. I mean, what I'm doing here is not those guys. It's some of what we talk about with Absolute is like if you're doing a new version of character or characters, do something here that we couldn't do in the other universe, right? Like if you want to do a regular Omega Men story with those characters that we know as the Omega Men, you can do that over there, right? Like those characters are there waiting to be reinvented in whatever way you want. So this is not that. This is still, in my mind, the Omega Men who kind of see themselves in the same way as they're sort of this ragtag band of freedom fighters. They're fighting to free a planet from tyranny. It happens to be Earth, and they see the main enemy as Lazarus Corp. There's questions as to whether they're good guys or bad guys, depending on who you ask. Their methods may be a bit darker and more extreme at times, but in their mind, they're fighting a really fearsome enemy who is killing people all over the planet. But we realize as the issue goes along that the guy we're seeing there is Jimmy Olsen. So again, we kind of have Lois and Jimmy who, on opposite ends of the spectrum. The just in the same way when Lois and Superman first met in issue 2, it didn't go the way we usually see those meetings where she shoots him in the face a lot, and he drags her around by handcuffs and like that. When we see Lois and Jimmy meet for the first time, they don't exactly hit it off. There's a lot of guns and faces and punches being thrown.
One other element that I've been really curious about is the Peacemakers, and particularly Smith. You mentioned having a darker take on everything. Obviously, Peacemaker's current cultural perception is very big and boisterous, and this feels like a
Right.
very interesting complement to it. How are you handling that kind of balance and sending him down the tragic path that he's in, especially in this issue?
I like the idea of the peacemakers as kind of these corporate soldiers for Lazarus Corp. That was kind of the perfect, model to use for him. I love that character too. And pretty much any books that came out from DC in the 80s, I was interested in. And I'm, moving ever closer to, I feel like owning every DC comic that was published in the 1980s. That's one of my collecting goals. So I love that old Peacemaker miniseries from back in those days. So I've always liked that character. I love what James Gunn has done with that character, and that first season of the TV show was really awesome. So yeah, this is kind of different version of Christopher Smith, and that this is a guy who's just trying to kind of do his job, and again being told like you're the good guy here, you're helping protect the planet, and you're fighting the good fight, and you're just bringing peace to troublesome parts of the world that really need it. And then we kind of see how he cracks under that a little bit, and then is very much manipulated by the Lazarus Corp AI, which is really just Brainiac sitting in his lair telling him what to do. And Brainiac, we don't really know really anything about him at all, right? Like where he came from, what he's after. Is he really the one pulling the strings at Lazarus Corp, or is it somebody else? We don't know the answers to any of that yet. You can kind of tell, especially in this issue, he's sort of a force who's moving people around like pieces on the chessboard. And so he puts Smith back in the fire, presumably knowing how that's going to go. And we'd see at the end when he snaps, when Superman finds out about that, it's going to be a we don't really know what's going to happen. I don't think Superman knows what's going to happen, so we'll have to wait and see.
What has the creative process been like with Rafa? Because especially aesthetically, everything just feels so fully realized down to the costuming, the world. What has that back and forth been like?
Rafa's awesome. I think he bought into this idea right from the get-go of like, this is our universe, our Superman. We get to pick and choose whatever we want to from the other universe, but really we want this to feel fresh and new and ours. So I think everything Rafa has done, designed from Krypton to Superman's suit to the various characters we meet in the present day. There's a mix of kind of things that feel somewhat traditional, but a lot of it feels very bold and new. So I like that mix of things. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel in some sense with Superman, but we also want there to be parts of that character's history that look and feel very different from what we've seen before. And I think Rafa's done an amazing job with that, and kind of just keeps getting better and better. Issue 5 is kind of a big part in the Krypton story. Like those flashbacks we've seen, and you can tell we're kind of getting closer to Krypton's last days, and you get that in issue 5, and I think those are going to be some really powerful pages for people. Even though spoilers, the planet explodes, right? Like even though that you've seen that story a million times, right? I think this will still be a version of it that it will be able to break your heart a little bit in ways you're not expecting.
I can't wait to see it. I'm so scared in the best possible way to see what exactly that entails. So in the flashbacks, you kind of mentioned there's a reference to cousins and other members of the L family. You kind of mentioned just picking and choosing various elements. Obviously, the Superman family is this huge part of the canon now in the main universe that a lot of people love.
Right.
Is there a chance to kind of get the Superman family or some of even like the weirder villains from the Rogues Gallery?
Certainly there's a chance, yes.
Mhm.
But I will say this is a question I've always grappled with how to answer, because I don't want to just give you the answer. We'll have to wait and see. I
Okay.
think clearly we don't see anyone else on Earth, right? It is Kal-El and his suit. So his suit's kind of really the only other voice from Krypton. I like that idea of the last son of Krypton, right? I think it's an important piece of kind of the tragedy of this story, of that Kal-El comes to Earth as a person, as he has a very real Kryptonian identity and tons of connections to his home planet. He remembers it despite its troubles and despite things he didn't like about it. He loved his life on Krypton. He loved where he grew up. He loved his family. So I think it's important that so much of that is ripped away from him. How that plays out over time, we'll see. I do think it's like you said, that over in the regular DC universe, there's a huge Superman family. There's a huge Batman family. Like all those characters over there have so many other allies, such a legacy that goes back years and years and years. Absolute, you have none of that. I think all these characters should be more alone and more isolated and more in trouble than we're used to seeing them within their own books, and also with this universe at large. That continues to be an important part of it to me.
What would you say has surprised you the most about the experience of working on this book so far? Like you said, you're kind of dipping your toe into DC. This is like the biggest thing you've done. So like how has that experience been? Like what is the biggest surprise of it?
I think just how cool and easy it's been. Like I came into DC really not knowing anybody. Ben Abernathy, who was the Batman editor a couple years ago, he was sort of the only person I'd worked with in the past, and then he left. He went to Skybound. He's over doing Transformers and GI Joe now. So coming in with really having no personal relationships with anybody. I mean, I knew some of the creators, but we'd never worked together. I've known Scott Snyder for years, but we've never done anything together. So some of it's just how easy all of that transition has been, and how it seems like a really great time to be working at DC. Everybody feels very excited. It feels like editors are kind of getting to do books that they want to do, that they're excited to do. It's a mix of creators, kind of some have been at DC a long time, some like me are sort of showing up, like Dan Slott coming to do Superman. Like Dan and I, of course, have known each other for years. And so it feels like a cool, exciting time to be at DC, which I mean, I didn't know any of that going in. I've been at Marvel for 15 years, and I want to do DC first stuff for the first time, and let's see how that goes. And very actively said when I started talking to people, like, I'm not looking for an ongoing book. I've done ongoing books for 15 years, and I want to take a bit of a break and do smaller projects. And then Scott called me up and was like, let's do this Absolute Universe. And I was like, well, damn, I guess I can't say no. Can't say no to that kind of opportunity, because that one sometimes you feel like, well, look, this character's not going anywhere. This opportunity will be there down the road. But the absolute universe, that's not the case. This kind of stuff doesn't come along very often. So I think that the timing was so great, and just how easy all that's been, and really like the absolute universe has very much felt like just a small group of us in a room figuring out an entire universe. It started with just kind of me and Scott, and then me and Scott and Kelly, and now we've added Jeff Lemire and Al Ewing and Dennis Camp, and it keeps growing, but it still feels like we're all just in that proverbial room together, figuring out what do we want the history of this universe to look like, where do we want these characters to go, what does it look like when they finally meet each other, like that stuff is super super exciting of getting to plan out. To me it feels like the best moments from sort of some of the Marvel retreats I was at over the years, where it's just we're all kind of building this grand story together. So some of it just that everything has turned out so great. I guess it's been so easy and so much fun.
Thank you to Jason for taking the time to do this interview, and thank you once again to DC for helping set it up. Definitely go pick up a copy of Absolute Superman. If you haven't already, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. As always, you can find me on social media at Hey It's Jenna Lynn. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, go read some comics.